Okay, welcome everybody. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law. We are up to chapter 46, and paragraph 34. Siman Mem Vav, Sif Lamed Daled. Okay, and we're discussing worms, and not the gummy ones. You know, they're okay. You can eat those ones if they have a good action, of course. Let's got two people coming in. We'll just wait for them to come in. So one, like we said, we're discussing two types of worms or bugs, we'll say. So one type, and so generally when we mention worms in halacha means any type of insect or bug. Just the worms are the more common, so that's why it's used. But any type of non-kosher creepy crawly. So some are very tiny, and the bug, because it's tiny to start with, the eggs that it lays are microscopic. So as we said, things that are microscopic don't concern us in halacha. If we're worried about microscopic organisms, then every time you breathe in air, you're breathing in microscopic organisms. Every bite of food that you take is going to have microscopic organisms on it. So the bugs, the eggs, are not a problem. So it's just another microscopic organism. And sometimes what happens is when these eggs hatch, what hatches is also microscopic initially, at least. In which case we're also not concerned. And it's only once they get bigger. But once they get bigger, if they only ever stayed in the fruit, then they're technically not a problem because we consider it as if halachically they came into existence while they were in the fruit. It's like they were born by the fruit, so to speak. It's only once they leave, if they stick their head out or something and go back in, it becomes a problem. A kashrus problem, as we did say, there's another issa called Baal Shaksu, not to be disgusting. Right, so sitting there eating a nice apple full of little worms that grew there, that came from microscopic eggs may not be a kashrus issue, but certainly about the shaksu issue. Right? It's yeah. So chapter 34. Now we're talking about slightly bigger worms now. To Taloim Agadalim Bapyrus, but you have worms that they grow in the fruit while the fruit is still connected to the tree. Surim, you're not allowed to eat them, kashrus wise.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
not disgusting. How can we have kosher locusts or grasshoppers? This isn't Missouri, that's why.
Well, there are certain species that are kosher, and I don't know. I mean, they. I don't know if Ashkenazim are meant to eat them because we've lost the Messiah, but there are people, Moroccans, Yemenites, that they still had those species around where they lived, so they kept the Messiah, and so you see them sometimes in Israel. People they put them in the oven, and they become crispy like chips, and they sit there with a bowl, and they eat them, and you see them in stores sometimes in Israel.
Uh,
I've got to say I always had a bit of a yetzer hara to try them, but since Ashkenazim lost the Messiah, we're not allowed to. But in theory, see, a lot of these things also have to understand. Worms, bugs. I think they're gross in most societies. Other things, let's say for example, there are places in the world where they eat dogs as a staple food. Now, for us, the Torah says a dog's not kosher. A cow, for example, is kosher. So we eat beef. We don't eat dogs. But if not for kashrus, what makes a dog better than what makes a cow better than a dog? It's just societal norm. So it's there's certain cultures where they might be horrified that you eat some of the animals we eat. but a dog is perfectly normal. That's food. Well, in the Western world, generally speaking, dogs are looked at as pets or work animals. They're not looked at as a food. So it's shocking. So I think talking about the dogs, different things. I think it's a staple. It's a regular food in many places in the world. So it's not about the shaksu issue. I had a friend many years ago when we were yeshiva students. He went to, I believe it was Thailand. It's a long time ago. I don't really remember. To run a Seder. Now they have massive ones there, but before there was a full-time shliach there. And he went into what he thought was a pet store. And he saw a cute little puppy, and he thought he would bring it as a gift to where he was staying. So he picked it. I said, I'll take this one. And they said, okay, you finish your shopping, we'll pack it up for you. And when he came back, he got a nice little package. He says, what's this? It says, what you ordered. And he opens it up, and there's like little steaks, he was ill. He vomited. It's his mind. But in other places, it's for us. We have what the Torah says: the foods that are good for our soul. I probably should have mentioned this before. Maybe I haven't discussed it once. There's a parable. There's a fellow buys a shirt and has care instructions on the shirt, and they are, it says, you can't wash in hot water and you can't put it in the dryer. You have to hang to dry. So he thinks to himself, what a chutzpah. After I paid them all that money to buy the shirt, it's mine, and they're telling me what I should do with it? Who do they think they are? So he washes it in hot water, he puts it in the dryer, and when he comes back, he's got a little shirt that's the perfect size for his daughter's doll. Just shrunk. Care instructions, if they're legit, is because the person who made it, they know what's good for it, what's not so good for it, and they're giving you advice on how to best protect and care for the product. So Hashem made our neshamas, and Hashem told us certain foods. This is the care instruction. Kashrus or misses in general, but specifically kashrus, it's the care instruction. And unfortunately, there are some people, who they should tell me what to do. I'll eat what I want to eat. Okay, all right. And although everyone has freedom of choice, and so you can't, it's but at the end of the day, they're damaging themselves. And this is the issue. So the animals that are normal for us is what Torah says is normal. But if not, obviously dogs aren't kosher, but theoretically, if they were, then we would have been eating them for 3,500 years, and we look at them as normal food. Just in our mind, it's not a food. And some supermarkets in Australia sell kangaroo steak. Yeah, so they're not kosher. So I never tried one. But if it was kosher, why not? I'd try one. Why not? I used to be very interested in why people ate certain things. So I remember there was a person that I knew that used to eat snake. So I asked him, what does it taste like? He says, chicken. So I thought to myself, so eat chicken, right? Someone told me rat tastes like chicken. People don't crack. There was actually a non-kosher Chinese restaurant in Crown Heights that they used to catch rats in the alley and put them in they got caught by the health department. So again, someone I knew who's in Shmira, and they go together with someone from the African American community that's on a patrol, and he asked him if he ever ate there, and he says, yeah, I used to go all the time because they were so generous with the chicken. So people didn't know the difference. So I always thought to myself, if it had a unique flavor, something that you can't get somewhere else, I could understand there's people who might want to eat a snake. But if it tastes like chicken, so eat chicken. I don't know. I'm not sure be chasing snakes if all it does taste like a chicken. Then they have this an animal in Australia called an echidna. It's like a cross between a hedgehog and a little kangaroo type thing. Anyway, but I was at an educational there was an Aboriginal lady, and she brought in roast echidna, and she was offering to people to try. So obviously it's not kosher. I'm not interested in trying it. But I asked her, what did it taste like? They said, just like roast beef, but tough. I thought to myself, who wants to eat roast beef? Tough, that's tough. Who wants tough meat? You want nice tender, so I don't think we're missing out on anything. Well, besides that, Chazal tell us we don't. Whatever you can't eat that's not kosher, there's something else kosher that has a flavor. Right? It's people sometimes talk about bris milah, and they say, having a bris reduces the risks of cancer in the area dramatically. Now, it could be it is, but I'm not sure that should be used as a marketing tool for bris milah. That's the reason we have a bris is that's how we make a covenant, a connection to Hashem with our bodies. We had an operation, so there was some pain or something. So, like anything, Hashem balances it out, gives you something back in return. You miss out on something, so you get something. So therefore, there may be there's a health benefit, but that's not the reason. That's a very minor side point. But it's anything there is. So we can't eat snake, but we have chicken. Chicken, Baruch Hashem. So there we go. It's I used to when I lived in Brisbane, I gave a hechsher to a soy factory, and one of the things they made was vegetarian ham. It was all soy based. Now I can't tell you if it tasted exactly like ham because Baruch Hashem I didn't have it, but it did taste good. That I can tell you, and it didn't taste like regular. But at home, at that time, my oldest son was 2, 3 years old. I was always afraid if we would call it vegetarian ham, what the product was officially called, that you can imagine the rabbi's son telling people we had ham on Chinny. So we used to call it vegetarian sausage. It's called vegetarian sausage at home, but today, Baruch Hashem, you get everything, all the flavors. I'm not necessarily saying that you want to chase all the flavors, I'm not necessarily saying you need all the flavors, but today everything's available. No one misses in anything. Keeping kosher, Baruch Hashem. All right. So for those who joined us while we were discussing that, chapter 46, number 34. So we said that worms that grow in the fruit while it's connected to the tree. So here we're talking about ones that are not microscopic, right? You can see them, but even though they grew when it was connected to the tree and they've never left, asurim, they're not kosher. Even though they never left the fruit. Now, even more than this, sometimes you find in the fruit the same poilomachitnius, and also in different types of beans, commit the kudish chayra, a black dot on it. And this is the place where the worm started to take form. So again, we're talking about these worms that was microscopic egg, and it hatched or something like that. It's too small for the eye to see, but it leaves some type of mark where it starts to grow. So and you have to cut into the depth of the fruit and remove that piece. That's where something is developing. And it's just as not kosher as an actual worm itself, because developing there are these tiny little things that are already having effect that can be seen by the human eye. Okay, 35. Any fruit that gets worms, it's common for it to have worms attached to the tree. Im avro love yud beis chodesh mission nislash mutter. If 12 months have passed since it was picked, it's kosher. You don't have to check inside. Now you might need to check the outside because you can have new bugs come, but you don't need to open it up 12 months later because we presume that it's not alive anymore. Any creature, any bug that doesn't have bones, I mean, I don't think any bugs have bones, but any animal, any living thing that does not have bones, does not live beyond 12 months. And therefore, it's disintegrated. It's become just like dust. However, since we're worried that fruits can become infested after it was picked, we have to check them anyway. And you can throw away the worms and the gnats and different things they're found on the outside, and you could still eat the fruit if you like. Sounds very appetizing, doesn't it? Yeah. But you get rid of the things. So, you see often dates, figs, a lot of the dry figs, sometimes you see it's good to break them open before you eat them. Break it in half. And sometimes, you see, I'm going to say like 1 in 100 or something like that. Maybe it's less. All right. Now, when we say fruit here, we're really talking about any produce. And afterwards, you put it in cold water and you move it around, quite well. So what will happen is that the worms that are in the holes will come to the surface and you get rid of them. And then you should put them into boiling water. And that way any worm that's still on this fruit, Yamas miyad will die immediately without coming out of the fruit. And this this method is for beans and lentils and the like. But and this is specifically only after 12 months. Now the reality is, how do you check different vegetables and fruit? It really depends on what the fruit is and where you are. Right? So there's certain things, I grew up in Australia, there's certain things that were never really had infestation problems in Australia that are problems here, and vice versa. I guess at different climates, different bugs and different things. I guess also because a lot of fruit species and vegetable species are imported. So some, where they are, normally have a natural, I don't know, predator is the right word for fruit and vegetables, but there's something that lives in that environment that likes them. Or when you bring it to another country, sometimes they don't have bugs that come after them. So it's really it's whatever is known to be infested in the area, and what it needs to wash it. 36. All pyrus, all, I mean, often we translate fruits, but we need any produce at all.
So,
It
Rabbi,
requires, yes. Yeah.
so when it says that any worm that remains will die immediately, that means that we don't have to worry about that worm that's inside after it's placed in boiling water and all that stuff.
So now we're coming to the next one. We're saying everything requires an internal. Bedika means internally. You're gonna open up inside. So if achas, you have to open everyone. And throw away the seeds, the pits. So you can check them well. And you have to be very careful about this. When you have to specifically be careful about this when you're preserving them in honey and sugar. Lekva, and also when you're making lekva was a type of like a jelly. It was prunes. It doesn't help just to check some of them. You have to check every single piece of fruit. For the bodak is a roy, even if you check the majority. Mahani doesn't help. The sarchlim they call pre. You have to check every single piece of fruit. So again, today I don't think in a I don't know where you most pieces of fruit where we live today, there's not a major infestation problem with fruit, at least. Here talking about plums. Plums generally aren't infested. If you look on the outside, you don't see any external signs of wormholes, different things. I think it's quite rare that, or apples or oranges is going to be full of worms. Right? But that's, I guess, where he lived in Hungary. The plums had an infestation problem. So some of these things is going to change from place to place and time to time. And I think also today, a lot of the fruit that we have, even if we're not living next to the farm, how did it get to us? It's refrigerated trucks, doing things. Well, in the past, things were outside a lot more. Pesticides is obviously a factor. I'm not talking about health issues with pesticides, but it does certainly help the bug problem. It is a factor why we have far less bugs, different things. Obviously, they found some pesticides aren't very good for people either. That's another story. All right. So if you live in a place where it's known that this fruit is infested, then every single one has to be checked. 37. The prominence of a kamak about toloim gedolim. Sometimes you find large worms in flour and things. It's good enough if you just sift it, right, and get them out. Shayna toloim ovrim. You need a sifter that the worms can't get through. It's the flour is much finer; it'll come through. I will nim somebody milvin. But if you find these small little bugs, let me hand off it. Then it doesn't help to sift it, because I'll go through the sifter as well. Weevils and these little bugs. Again, it sounds a little gross just to sift it out, but people were much poorer than we are today, and to throw out all the flour was a big hit. I'll tell the story when I was. I won't say, I learned in several yeshivas, but one yeshiva I learned in, the students had a turn. Each one, we had 1 week where we looked after the coffee machine. Right? Came my week, look after the coffee machine, and midweek we had to reload the sugar. So I went to the cook to ask for some sugar. He shows me he's got a big pot, and he says the sugar's in there. I should help myself. So I pick up the lid, and there's all these ants running around in the sugar. So I told him, I said it's full of ants. He says, sift it. So I went to the head of the yeshiva to complain. And he says to me, that's not right. And I said, no. He says, you tell him he should sift it himself. Anyway, I went to the corner store, I bought a pack of sugar, and I reloaded the machine. And I was extra careful about what I took from the coffee machine in the future. And, that's how it went. All right. Now, someone has wheat kernels that are infested with worms. You should ask a Rav, ask a competent authority, what he needs to do before he can grind it into flour. Right. So again, it's a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law. So there's a lot of factors. So we're not going to doesn't go through all of them. It's a summary. But if someone had that situation, they would have to, to cut a long story short, though. If it's heavily if it's majorly infested, then you're gonna have to throw the whole thing away. Right? You have to throw the whole thing away. It depends if it's just a little bit and other circumstances, a great financial loss and different things. So 38. Kol davar tliya. Anything that develops worms, but it's not usually something that is expected to get worms. So it could get worms, but it's not a something that where you live is a infested. So it's generally insect free. But yours is insect free. So you have. Let's start again. I didn't explain it well enough. You have this fruit. It's wormy, but it's something. But it's not something you normally have to check for worms. It's not normally a wormy thing where you live, so you normally don't have to check them. But happen to be, you notice your one is infested. So, you're not allowed to sell it to a non-Jew. Why? He's allowed to eat worms. We're worried he'll resell it back to another Jew. And what'll happen is because it's something that doesn't need to be checked, it's not normally infested in your area, that Jew won't check it. So that's our concern. However, you're allowed to make whiskey or or moonshine or vodka or something out of this grain that or out of this fruit that had the worms, right? So again, in the Big Shulchan Aruch, it explains over there, because when you have the whiskey, again, I have to admit my ignorance. I'm not an expert in the brewing process, but what Shulchan Aruch says is that you don't have the actual grain in the whiskey. It's the flavor. The flavor goes into the drink. So the flavor, we're not concerned about the fact that there's maybe worms in the grain. It's only if you're going to have the actual grain that it becomes a problem. So you could make whiskey out of it. And we're not worried that a person will come to a misstep, by since he's keeping it, that a member of the household might come and eat it. But the condition on this is he doesn't keep it a long time. He has to pretty much make it straight away. Okay, 39. There are many types of vegetables that we have a chazaka. In other words, there's a it's expected that they are infested with worms. Just explain the halakha concept of chazaka. Chazaka is something that it's the norm, or there's a reason to believe it's true because of its current situation. So even though you haven't necessarily inspected it, so certain types of vegetable, majority of the time infested, have certain bugs on them. So even though you didn't check this particular piece, until you have checked it or cleaned it, it has an assumption that has these bugs or worms on it. That's what a chazaka means. And some of them, a different type of bug, little mites or something. It's again, these vegetables are expected until we know otherwise that they have these bugs. And this, that some people say that they singe the vegetables with fire, and by singeing the edges that gets rid of the bugs. Ain't a mile. It doesn't help. It's not fully effective. Right? You have to actually examine the these vegetables. And there's many types of fruit. many Yerakos and varying types of vegetables. That there's such a chazaka, they're so commonly infested with worms, that it's essentially impossible to check them. It's not impossible to check them. By checking them means to rid them. There's so many bugs in this thing, you can't get them out. And therefore it's appropriate that any person who's a Yiras Shamayim, they often translate this as a fear of heaven, but it means someone who's really wants to do the right thing. That's what it means. They really want to do the right thing. They should avoid eating these fruit or vegetables at all. And again, what vegetables or fruit they are will depend where you live and your time. Certain things are more best in other places than others. There are also certain types of fruits who the pits commonly, it's mufsuk, it's assumed that there's worms in the pits, and therefore you can't eat them, can't eat the pits. All right, so this is again, I'm not sure here so much, but I know in Australia the tops of asparagus always had worms or little bugs. You can never get them out. So you have to chop off the top of the asparagus before you cooked it. So again, I'm sure that's something maybe dependent on which region you live. So I'm not telling people they can't eat asparagus necessarily, but I know where it's where we grew up, there was a lot of. So it's one of these things you can't get them out. Okay, number 40. Now, certain nuts have a lot of mites. And so how do you tell? How do you know if they are infested or not? When you remove the part that you eat from the shell, you hit the shell with something that's a little bit warm. So then, what'll happen is these mites will come out. If you see some come out, then now you have to really be very careful and check everything, and you have to do a good job. All right, so I guess if you don't see any mites come out, then it's no problem. 41. The pomim sometimes you find a certain fruit that's been preserved in honey or sugar, that around the top of the container, there's also these little bugs. So you have to clean it really well, the mouth of the container. And also take out some of the food until you have ascertained that there's none in the food. Again, this is just how they stored it. Today we don't do this so much, really. It's again, we have a higher standard of living today, and all different things are imported from all different parts of the world, and you can get whatever, pretty much all year round. Might be more expensive at certain times of the year, but you can get almost anything at any time. But used to be, we mentioned plums before. Plums were in season for 4 to 6 weeks. That's it. Not till next year. So people used to preserve them. They used to make that's what they did. There was so today we don't really preserve all our fruit. I mean, we sometimes buy jams or jellies and things, but that's just normally because we like the spread. But it's not because that's what we need to eat. Okay, 42. Chasach peri or tznoin b'sakin. You cut a fruit or a radish with a knife. And why you did that? You cut through a worm that was in them. So you cannot native. Now you have to wash the knife off really well. The gam minachitzoin, and also from the peel. Also peel a bit of the radish or the fruit. Because that's the place where it was cut. Because sometimes when you cut, you push it in. So if you're going to eat that fruit, you have to cut a little bit of the side away where you would cut through the worm, and also make sure the knife is cleaned. Okay, 43. I hope no one had fish for lunch, because we're going to discuss finding worms and fish now. So sometimes you find worms and fish. Now, but mayach in the brain. Now, I say most fish today, you buy them gutted, pretty much. You generally speaking. I mean, sometimes you do catch your own fish and you gut it yourself. So a lot of these organs we're going to mention in a moment, it's not really so relevant because you don't have the intestines in the fish when you cook it. But often people cook it with the head. Or it comes Rosh Hashanah and they cook the fish head, right? And so if there's a worm in the brain or something, it could be problematic, right? It can make the whole fish head not kosher, different things. So sometimes worms are found in the brain or the chabed, is the liver, but mine or the intestines, or bapero in the mouth, or basnaim, or in its, normally it says naim means the nose, but by the fish, the gills. But prat b'daga nikra hecht, and particularly a fish that's called the hecht. Right, hecht is a pike fish. Right, so if you know people, so it's not an uncommon Jewish name. Right, hecht is a last name. So they're pikefish. So dakim barukim. So sometimes the worms and fish, they're very long and very thin. Now, makam shkiach tzurichim bedikim. So again, different places in the world, different climates. Some have more worms, some have less worms in parasites and fish. But if you live in a place where they're somewhat common, then you have to check the fish before you do anything with it. Okay, v'chein beherring. Same with herring. Dakim. In the milky liquid, there's tiny worms. And they have to be examined. So again, I think today when you buy your herring, neatly in the plastic or glass jars, there's not really worms in the things, but used to be. And it's a very important thing to eat because you never want to be hard of herring. Sorry, that was a bad one. But it's all right. So yeah, but you have to, if you live in a place where these things are infested, that's what you need to check. Also, some fish have near the fins, they have little parasites on them. And also on the fins in the mouth and behind the gills. Small little insects. And they're round. These little bugs, they're round. They look like a lentil, like a bean. And you have to examine these parts, and you have to scrape them off properly. You don't want to cook the fish with these little bugs on it, either inside it or on it. So again, it's all relatively speaking. I think today, when you buy from the stores, most of them really don't really have bugs. They've all been well cleaned, and generally, again, I mean, depends. I guess you have to look at your local fish shop if they actually really clean properly or not. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, there's a joke about in Russia, a guy asked a Jew, "Why are you Jews so smart?" And the Jew replies, "We eat the head of the fish." And he says, "I happen to have one here. I'll sell it to you for 10 rubles." So the guy gives him the 10 rubles. Then a week later, the guy says, "I stopped by the fish store, and the fish head only costs a couple of kopecks." The Jew says, "See, you're smarter already."
It's working. Okay. 44.
There's another joke that they say, why are the oceans so salty? Because they're full of herring.
There we go. That would be handy. I'd go more often. Telaim animsam begvino. Worms that you find in cheese. Now, im einem nimosim alav maturin. If you're not disgusted by them, you're allowed to have them. So again, let's clarify this. So when it comes to Baltashaksu, something that's disgusting to most people, it doesn't matter if you find disgusting or not. So let's say, for example, let's just use a simple example. Let's say rotting meat, spoiled, it's rotting. That's disgusting to the majority of humans. You know, no one's going to eat. So the fact that you find a person who is willing to eat it, that's still about they transgress about the shocks of being disgusting because even though it doesn't bother him. Where we have something where we say it depends on the person whether they find disgusting or not, there's something that in society some people do, some people don't. So today, again, I'm not sure that people are going to eat cheese with worms in them. Like I know there's meant to be some type of fancy cheese that has these worms in it and different things, and I don't know. I guess I'm just I'm just unsophisticated and different things, but you know, I keep saying I go past this display in the local supermarket here, and they got these incredibly expensive cheeses. They're not kosher anyway, but it looks like it has varicose veins and it smells like my old sneakers. I just don't see the attraction to eat these things. But look, if people like it, good on them. I just because it's not my taste doesn't mean I should discourage others. You know, if they enjoy it, by all means.
Are you somebody was telling us about Swiss cheese? Did we hear that from you?
Yeah, that nowadays they use a drill. They use drill.
It used to
Yeah,
be
once
the
upon a time they used to age it much longer, but you know, time is money. So they use chemicals to make it age quicker, and then they use they drill it. But seemingly I think the cheese they're talking about here is like a cottage cheese or a cream cheese. It's a softer cheese. Generally, that's so. If you're not disgusted by the worms, then you can take the worms out. Oh, I don't know. Colors eventually partially gone as long as they never entirely left the cheese. So I guess we're also talking about some once this type was microscopic when they were laid, so they considered part of the cheese. And yeah, all right. Delicious. I'm sure there's a market for it somewhere. All right. 45. Harbes Haris Hero Torah B'Shrotzim. Now, it's not just one prohibition about eating bugs and creepy crawlies and things. There are several prohibitions. Warim become 11, and when a person eats them, they transgress several negative prohibitions. Matamas nefesh, and they also make their soul tummy. They you know, that's what we were talking before about the care instructions. They're damaging themselves spiritually. The Siva says that Mason bomb. Otherwise, if you do it, Mason bomb become spiritually damaged. And therefore, a person has to be extremely careful to avoid stumbling and eating any of these bugs. All right.
Rabbi,
So we're
can I
finished
ask
with
you
bugs
a
for a while.
question? Can I
So
ask
yes,
you a
Susan,
question?
yeah.
Are snakes considered kosher or not kosher?
No, snakes not kosher.
Not kosher. And why?
Yeah, so a land animal has to chew its cud and have split hooves.
Has to have a hoof.
Yeah. Both conditions. Split
conditions.
who's and
Split who's
Schwartz
and Schwartz
card.
card.
Obviously, bugs don't have either one.
No,
So you're not
that's why.
That's why.
That's why we
That's why
can't
we
eat
can't
them.
eat them.
Okay. Under most circumstances.
All right.
Well, in fact, in the Torah, the prohibition against against eating things that go on their belly has that large vav, which marks the middle letter of the Torah.
Yes. Yeah.
But
But the basic rule, basis, you see,
You see,
also part of the
part
part of the problem that we have is that we call these things in English with different terms than we call it in Hebrew. So just to go off the topic slightly, just to it'll help clarify before we go to
do you know what a
what I'm gonna mention
lamprey
here.
is? A lamprey is it's not a snake, and it's warm-blooded. But we
Right, that's
don't
why I
want-
just want to explain all these things.
Okay.
So we have, let's say for example, let's talk about we have Pri Hadama and Pri Ha'etz. The fruit of the tree and literally the fruit of the tree and the fruit of the land. Now, often what we do in English is we call Pri Ha'etz fruit and Pri Hadama vegetables. But that's not really true because, bananas are Adama, even though they're probably fruit, tomatoes. And if we're going to be technical, then even things like cauliflower and broccoli are flower, so they're technically a fruit, not a vegetable. So it's a danger when we try to put English terms. Pri ha'etz means the tree that it grows on, that same branch, stem, piece, whatever it is, will have new fruit on it next year. I mean, obviously someone could chop down the branch or break it up, but in concept. So let's use a simple example. An apple, the same branch, the apple's grown this year. Next year, apple's grown the same branch. That makes it Pri ha'etz. Pri hadama, again, we'll use a banana as a line in the sand. That piece that banana's grown dies away, and a new piece grows up. Most of the vegetables, even if they're technically in English a fruit, but they don't have the fruit growing again on the same piece. It dies away and new grows. So that's considered growing from the ground because every year it's a new growth that grows on it, new that has something. So that's Pri hadama. So the other thing is when we talk about fish, we translate the word a dog as fish. It doesn't mean fish. A dog is a creature that lives primarily in the water. So even though a dolphin or a whale is technically a mammal, not a fish in English, they are a dog. They live primarily in the water. Frogs, well, it depends. Some amphibians live primarily on the land and they go in the water, so they would have the rules of a land animal. And some of them live primarily in the water and occasionally come on land. So then they would have the rules of a fish, of a dog, of a sea animal, a water animal, not necessarily sea. Some live in fresh water, but so we have rules. The rules for a sea animal, anything that lives, or water animal, I should say, anything that lives doesn't have to be permanently water. It could be amphibian, but primarily in the water. Anything that lives primarily in the water to be kosher has to have fins and scales that come off easily, right? There's certain type of fins, like say a shark also has scales, but the scales of a shark are embedded in the skin. So you can't pull out the scales without tearing the skin. But the type of scales that say that's like on a salmon, where you can scrape off the scales and you don't tear this, doesn't, if you do it properly, you don't tear off the skin. So that's the criteria for sea creatures, for water creatures. It doesn't matter if it has arms or legs, or or whether it's technically a mammal or amphibian or a reptile. You know, certain snakes that live primarily in the water, or whether it's what's called in English a fish. Anything that lives, its natural habitat is the water, has that set of rules. Then, if we exclude birds, birds is a separate category. Land animals. So land animals, again, doesn't matter if it has arms, legs, has no arms or legs, whether it's technically a mammal, a reptile, or amphibian, it's all irrelevant. If its primary place of habitat is on the land, it has the rules of a land animal, which means has to have split hooves and chew its cud. Then we have, I'm going to loosely call it birds, but let's call it flying animals. Probably is a better. So therefore, a bat is also under the rules of birds, even though a bat's not a bird in English. But the criteria is it's a flying animal as opposed to a land animal. I mean, it's a land animal, but there's a subcategory of land creature that flies. And therefore, even insects, certain like a fly, like the insect, the fly, is considered a creepy crawly of the birds, right? It's a flying creature, right? While other certain insects are the creepy crawlies of land animals. So we have sea creatures, water creatures, things that live primarily in the water. We have land creatures that live primarily on the land, and then we have flying creatures. They're the three types of animals. Yeah, Susan, you have another question?
Yes, I looked up lampreys. It's an eel-like fish, but it doesn't have scales.
So then it's not kosher.
So it's not kosher, correct? But
No,
you were talking about bats. Bats are not kosher, are they?
no,
Hope not.
no, that's not kosher. So when I was saying that a bat is in the category of birds, I didn't mean it was a kosher one, but I'm saying when it comes to the criteria, decide whether something's got. In other words, a bat didn't even need to have hooves or chew its cud. I mean, it's not kosher anyway, but it's because it's not. That's the rule for land creature. Flying creatures has its own rules, and it happens to not be kosher also from that. But I was just putting it in that category. See, when we try and use English words and we say birds and fish, then what happens is you have all these animals that say like a whale that lives in the water, but it's not a fish, it's a mammal. Yeah, but it is a dog. A dog meaning it's a creature that lives primarily in the water. Right? Amphibians, certain frogs are primarily in the water and only come out in the land occasionally. So therefore they're going to be considered like water creatures. Other types of frog live primarily on the land and just sometimes go in the water. So they're going to be looked at as land creatures. Either way, they're not kosher, but it's a different halachic category for each one.
I think there are two different types of dolphins. There's dolphins, the fish, and dolphins, which is a mammal. I guess it's both considered fish.
Well, in halacha, I think all dolphins are mammals, but in halacha, it doesn't matter whether it's a mammal or a fish or a reptile or something. It's a dog. It's a creature that lives primarily in the water. And so sea snakes, right? So even though it's a reptile, not a fish, it's a dog because it lives primarily in the water.
I think one of the dolphins is called mahi. That's the fish dolphin as opposed to the other dolphin.
Yeah, could be. I'm not a dolphin expert, but it's so one of the What they do. One of the things that leads to misunderstanding. Now, obviously, translations are good because unfortunately, many of us are not able to learn an original text and have the knowledge of Hebrew and Aramaic and different things. But one of the problems with English, what we have to understand, and I think anyone who speaks or is at least familiar with more than one language understands this, you don't have words that match up exactly in two languages necessarily. And it leads to or could potentially lead to misunderstandings. And anyway, but we've got one more to finish the chapter. So let's squeeze it in as we're running short on time. Number 46. Hashola Moira Hira. When you ask a rabbi, Moira Hira means that they have received permission to give halakhic decisions. Eza Shiloh. So you ask them whatever question. Vasoroi, and if they answer you that you can't eat it, it's not good. You're not allowed to ask another rabbi to try and get a more lenient position, right? You can't go rabbi shopping and keep asking 10, 20 people to get the answer you want. Unless the only way you can is that you need to tell, if you're getting a second opinion, you're allowed to get a second opinion as long as you tell that rabbi what the first opinion said. Right? You can't just go shopping around and keep asking people to get what you want. But like anything in life, sometimes you want a second opinion, not quite sure, or maybe you think someone's overlooked something, just like in health issues, whatever it is, you get a second opinion. But when you go for a second opinion, you have to tell the first person. Sorry, you have to tell the second person what the first person ruled. So they can take that into account when they look at it. And, sometimes the second opinion may disagree with the first opinion, but at least you are honest and upfront. That's the main thing that we need to do. So whenever there's any questions with something, we, and that can happen a lot. Can happen a lot. Sometimes a little bit involved in, when people have, you see it more often when people have a Choshe Mishpat, they have financial business type questions. And sometimes whoever loses always wants a second opinion, usually. If they think they're right. Some people were just pushing their luck. And things get looked at. But as long as people know what the first Beth Din ruled and different things, they're usually happy to look at it.
Rabbi,
Yeah. Yes.
Since you don't have time for another halacha, I can tell you a short story.
Please.
A true story that maybe you heard of this. That in World War II, one of the boats that was coming over to escape Europe had a number of Jews on it, and they were davening on it was either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, and the non-Jewish captain of the boat told everybody that they have to be quiet and they have to finish davening at such and such a time in order that the noise from the davening is not detected by the enemy. And to make a long story short, they didn't finish on time and they kept on davening and it was loud. And the captain of the ship got very, very upset and he came over and slapped the rabbi who was in charge of the davening. And this Jew that was in the crowd, he cursed the captain that he would live to see all his children be killed before he is. So he didn't take it seriously. And then a couple of years later, or maybe the same year, that his first son died, and that was Joseph Kennedy Jr. And he thought it was just because he was in the war. And a number of years later, John F. Kennedy was killed. And then he started to take it a little seriously. And then a few years later, Robert F. Kennedy was killed. And then he was took it seriously. And that meant that Edward, the next son, was going to be killed. So Edward knew all of this. And on one occasion, he was in England and the Belzer Rebbe was there. And he told the Belzer Rebbe at the time the whole story. So the Belzer Rebbe sort of removed part of the curse, but he didn't remove the whole curse. And as a result of that, he was involved in an accident where I think he broke his back and he was almost killed. And he had a number of occasions where he was almost killed, but he wasn't killed, including being in a car with a girl that was killed.
Now, is that story verified?
I think so, yes.
That's creepy. That's really creepy.
That's fascinating. That's all right. Well, all right. We'll see you on next week, God willing.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks for sharing the
Thank you,
story.
Rabbi.
You love it.
And have a great week. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.